Hey there, just a quick check-in again about the paper that is due this week. It's Monday and your theory response paper is due on Thursday, and this is the big one. And I put a lot of information in the previous videos that I sent, and I just want to be sure that we're all on the same page. Sometimes it's easier to get directions verbally than it is to read them on a paper. So remember that for this, you are following the format in Insider's Guide. You have a paper that is a model for the paper that you're writing. It's the Insider's Guide sample paper on attribution theory. You're doing a paper exactly like that. You're reading a theory and you're looking at the literature review about what's already been done with that theory, and then you are looking at observations of how that has been witnessed in the real world. And I want to say how it's been witnessed in the real world because I've gotten a few questions about that personal observation. I'll get to that in just a second. So you're choosing one of the psychological or sociological theories that we looked at from the scavenger hunt that you got from that long list. And it is a theory related to human behavior. And you are researching that in NC Live. Now remember that NC Live is not as friendly as Google. So in NC Live, you're going to use keywords. And sometimes the keyword is not exactly, you can't, for instance, like with the scavenger hunt, I asked you the question of what happens when there are more people on the beach if a person's drowning. That's the bystander effect, which shows that the more people there are who could potentially intervene in a situation, the less likely any individual is to act. If you're on the beach by yourself and there's one drowning person, you look around, there's nobody else to save the person, you are going to jump in the water and you're going to try to save that person. But if there's other people there, you're like, well, I'm not such a good swimmer. It's not my place to do it. And let somebody else do it. So that's the bystander effect or theory. So you're researching in NC Live. You cannot Google, you can't type into the search string in NC Live, why drowning man drowns. That it cannot deal with that. It can only work with keywords. So once you have bystander effect, you can do bystander effect in quotation marks. You can do bystander effect and in that drop-down menu, remember you're using the advanced search, you could do bystander effect and some other thing like bystander effect and drowning, bystander effect and choking. You could look at what the particular topic is that you want to deal with. Some people are looking at confirmation bias. That has there are lots of names for confirmation bias. There are lots of related theories like in-grouping and belief bias. They're all very similar. So you could do confirmation bias or belief bias in quotation marks because that keeps it together as a chunk. And then in your next, in the advanced search where it has your first keyword and then it has the word and, you could do and below that, and you could search like confirmation bias and school, confirmation bias and the election. You could look at a specific topic there to help you with that. I do have a video on NC Live searches, so you should look at that video because I'm not sure that I made things much clearer about what I just said. So that is the purpose of that is for the literature review. So you have an idea about a theory like attribution theory. You're going to research what other people have said. And guys, there's no way you can't find the stuff. It's all about the search string that you use, but the information is there in NC Live. And remember that it cannot be information that's super old. All right, so this needs to be somewhat current. Some of the theories are old though, like the culture shock was from like the 1950s, so I do understand that, but a lot has been done since then about culture shock, which many of you noted in your journal entry. So the literature review is going to begin with the topic sentence about your topic, and then you're going to go through and use your APA citations. You need to make sure that that is straight, and that's why you're going to submit to Smart Thinking by tomorrow. You're going to give us sort of a narrative of what other researchers have found about that. Now, you then have your personal observations, and that's the part I wanted to get to. All right, so the personal observations maybe that should be better stated as real-world observations. So it's not necessarily I moved to a small town when I was 6 and it was very weird because it wasn't like the town I lived in before. That's not what we mean. We mean observations that you have made as if you are a social scientist out in the world. So things that you may have noticed in social media, things that you may have noticed by observing people in restaurants or things that you may have observed from the news. You don't have to use the personal pronouns I and me or in my opinion when you're doing personal observations. These are just things that you've observed in the real world. So for instance, you could say, I just gave an example in an email several years ago. A student was talking about the in-group issue and was observing how people do not want to be around people who are not like them. And she spent time in the Dunkin' Donuts on Sunset Avenue and observed that the young people have the ability to drive away older patrons to the restaurant. So around 3 o'clock, all these older people who've been sitting around working and drinking coffee, once the loud teenagers come in, they start to leave. So there was this effect that the teenagers were changing the customer base at a certain time of day. So you can say things like, the older people leave, the teenagers change the customer base. None of those have to have the words I observed in them. Then your next section is your evaluation of the theory, where you evaluate to what degree the observations of those scientists and the observations in the previous section prove that that is a valid theory, or how it should be changed. What are the implications of that theory in like the real world? You know, for instance, what are the implications of the fact that all those older people leave Dunkin' Donuts? Do the teenagers who come in there every afternoon after school, are they spending the kind of money that working adults spend when they're in there? Are they, you know, like it's like going to Pizza Hut just for the breadsticks. You know, like, are they going to spend the kind of money that those older adults do? So maybe there are some implications for the restaurant, you know, that it matters that there's this in-group situation happening there. So that's what you're doing in that last section. After you get that whole thing written, then you go back and you write the abstract, because the abstract is a summary of that research that you did. So abstract is, you know, we talked about summary and paraphrase. That's a summary. It's only 150 to 200 words, but you can't write that until you write your paper so that it's clear what your paper was about. And then finally, you're going to have a references list, and all that's got to be in APA format. And APA, as I've mentioned, is it's kind of a nightmare for people like me who majored in English and only wrote MLA papers all through undergraduate and graduate school. And so I learned APA teaching this class. I mean, luckily, this isn't the first time I've taught it, but this is where I learned APA. And so I know some mistakes, and I know the things to look for, because we're kind of all in this as novices together. So make sure that you get that checked. I mentioned that you can send it to Smart Thinking more than once if you do it early. You can send it for your development and those kinds of things, but then there is one on documentation. Be sure when you submit it to Smart Thinking, and by the way, that is an assignment. It is part of your grade. And so this is something that you can get credit for that's not related to writing skills. Just do it. But you need to be sure that you let them know that it is an APA formatted paper, because then they will help to check for that. You can suggest that that's one of the things that you need help with. Okay, again, I'm here on the Remind app. You can email me if you have questions. Some of you have been doing that. And yeah, have a good week.